Hello. Today we are going to talk about factoring to begin with. So here it asks, can the following quadratic equation be factored? Explain why or why not. So when I am trying to factor an equation, I first need to check that it's equal to 0. And sure enough, here it is equal to 0. All the variables, all the constants are on the same side of the equal sign. So we're good to go. When I am factoring, I am looking at A, B, and C. A is the number in front of x squared, my coefficient on x squared. Now remember that if I don't see a number in front of x squared, I assume that it is a 1. So here A is 1. B is -4, and C is -8. So when I am factoring, I am looking at A times C, which is 1 times -8, and that is -8. So I am looking at different factors, different numbers that multiply to -8. I've got 1 times -8, or -1 times +8. And then I have 2 times -4, or -2 times +4. If I check and see if any of these pairs add up to -4, I will find that none of these pairs add to -4. So, in answer to, can the following quadratic equation be factored? The answer is no, because there are no factors. Factors of -8 that add to -4. Because I am always checking factors of A times C of this number times this number that add to give me this number. That is what I am always checking for. However, here it asks me, does this quadratic equation have any solutions? How do you know? Remember that when we talked about in the solving square root equations assignment, if you can't factor it, the other way that we can check if something has solutions is if in the graph it has x-intercepts. So first I am going to graph this. So now I check this equation, x squared minus 4x minus 8 in Desmos, and I find that, okay, it does have x-intercepts. It does have solutions. However, these solutions are really ugly, really nasty, really disgusting decimals. How do I figure these out? And this is what we are talking about today. How we are figuring out those disgusting decimal solutions, those x-intercepts where the decimals are so long we have to round. We use the quadratic formula. So today we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula and identifying the discriminant of a quadratic equation. So this is new. We're going to talk about this today. To start out, this is the quadratic formula. Write it down. Write it down. This is so important. You need this. Okay? So, if you have an equation like this in standard form equal to 0, so you have A, B, and C, it is equal to 0, then you have this quadratic formula. And x equals, the fact that it says x equals means that this gives you the solution. This gives you the answer. So we are going to look at a couple of problems with this today. But let's talk about the discriminant. So the discriminant of the quadratic formula is the value of this expression, b squared minus 4ac. That is the part that is inside of the square root. Shoot. No. That is the part that is inside of the square root of the quadratic formula. So this part right here. This is the discriminant. So please make a note of that. So we are going to see, what does the discriminant tell us? So the discriminant is going to tell us how many solutions, how many x-intercepts that a quadratic equation has. So let's say we figure out b squared minus 4ac. We'll see a couple of examples of this. If it is greater than 0, remember, greater than 0, this means positive. If the discriminant is positive, then there are two real solutions, two x-intercepts. So if I was to look at a graph, it would have two x-intercepts. If b squared minus 4ac ends up being 0, then that would mean I have one real solution, which is one x-intercept, which is when the graph is just touching the x-axis. So when the bump is just touching it, it doesn't look like it's crossing through. And then finally, I have when it is less than 0. And remember, this means negative. So if this ends up giving me a negative number, then that would mean I have no real solutions, which is when the graph has no x-intercept, so when it does not cross at all. So we are going to do an example together, finding the discriminant of the quadratic equation. So remember that to find the discriminant, that is b squared minus 4ac. So it is b squared minus 4ac. So first, I have to look at my equation, and I have to know what a is, which here, a is that number in front of x squared. I don't see a number. I assume it's a 1. A is 1. B is negative 4. And then C is negative 8. So this is actually the same problem that we saw in the beginning. And of course, our equation is equal to 0. So this is a good thing. We are happy about this. We can use this. So when I am plugging into b squared minus 4ac, I like to put parentheses. Okay, I like to put the parentheses to remind myself I am not going to be seeing those letters anymore. I am going to be replacing those letters. Now, in the first one, I have b squared. Well, b is negative 4. Okay, here I'm going to put a. A is 1. And then here I'm going to put c. C is negative 8. Okay, so I can take this, I can plug it into a calculator and see what it gets me. So just that I can show you guys, when I plug this into Desmos, I type it exactly as I write it down on my paper, parentheses and everything. And here I see that it gives me 48. Now, 48 is positive. 48 is positive, so recall that if the discriminant ends up being positive, then there are two real solutions, two x-intercepts. Okay, now this is all we're asking here. Determine how many real solutions the quadratic equation has. It has 2. Now, on the next example, please do it on your own and be prepared to walk me through what you did. I am going to start grilling you guys about these things. Okay, next example. I am doing the same thing again. All right, next example. And so I am looking, I've got A is 2, B is -3, and C is 7. And of course, my equation already equals 0, which is so nice. That's what I want. Before I need to figure out A, B, and C, I need to check that it equals 0. So now I get to use my formula for the discriminant. Okay, because they're asking me to determine how many real solutions there are. So again, I replace those letters with the parentheses to show that I am replacing. Inside of that first parentheses, I've got b squared. My b is -3, so I've got -3 squared. In my second parentheses, I have a. I should have a, so that'll be 2. And then in my last one, I have c, so that's 7. All right, now this I can take and plug into my calculator. Okay, so see how here I plugged it in exactly as we wrote it down, and it gave me -47. Okay, so since this is negative, since my discriminant ended up being negative, then that means that there are no real solutions. If I check my chart, no real solutions, no x-intercepts. This graph is not going to touch the x-axis. It's not going to cross it. Okay? And again, next problem, you are going to do it on your own and be prepared to walk me through what you did. Okay, now I am seeing a new type of problem. Use the quadratic formula to find the solutions to the following quadratic equations. First things first, this needs to equal 0. Does it equal 0? No, it equals -13w. I got to get rid of that -13w. So how am I going to get it to the other side? How am I going to get rid of the -13w and make it 0? I am going to add 13w to both sides. Now, it is still very important that I maintain the order of things. 2w squared plus 13w plus 2 equals 0. Now I can figure out what A and B and C is. So A is 2, B is 13, and C is 2. Now, this is my quadratic formula. What I am going to do is literally anywhere I see a letter, I am going to put parentheses. So, equals negative parentheses plus or minus the square root of parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses all over 2 parentheses. And inside of these parentheses, I am going to be putting the different numbers. So, negative parentheses. What's going inside the parentheses is B. B is 13. Okay. B squared, parentheses squared. I'm going to put a 13 in there as well. Then 4 times A. A is 2. C is 2. And then all over 2 times A, which is 2 times 2. So, what do we do from here? Now, this is a lot of stuff. What do I do? I am going to use Desmos, my greatest calculator tool, and I will show you how. Okay, so here I am in Desmos, and I left the work open because I can't remember all this off the top of my head. So I do negative parentheses 13. Now, this plus or minus, there is no option for this in Desmos. Nowhere are you going to find a plus or minus sign. So what you have to do is you have to make two different lines. My bad. Parentheses 13 squared minus 4 times 2 times 2. When you want to put it all over 2a, you have to highlight everything, then hit the slash button to divide 2 times 2. All right, this is one of my answers. Now, sometimes it may not ask you for the answer in a decimal. It may ask you for the answer in most simplified form. So you're going to have to try and simplify all this stuff. I want to figure out what's that on the inside of the square root. Okay, it's 153. So I just double check. Negative 13 plus square root of 153 all over 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, it's the same thing. It will probably ask you to put something like this, but just know that this is the same thing as this. Now, this is one of your answers. Your other one is going to be exactly the same, except for a plus, it will be a minus in between. Instead of a plus, we have a minus. Okay, so those are our two answers. We've got plus, and then we have minus. Yep. So again, for this problem, our answers are x equals negative 13 plus square root of 153 over 4 and negative 13 minus square root of 153 over 4. Desmos is our friend here. And depending on what the assignment is or what test question it is, you can also get away with using the decimals for the answers. But just know that you can also use Desmos to help you simplify it and leave it like this. The next problem, do it on your own. Be prepared to walk me through what you did. Okay, here we go. Another problem where it is asking us to use the quadratic formula to find the solutions. First things first, I check that my equation is equal to 0. It is. I don't have to move anything. So I can go straight to finding A, which is 3, B, which is negative 1, and then C, which is negative 16. So now I can use my quadratic formula. So my quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Remember that since this is just a formula, I am replacing the letters with parentheses. So nice. Love a formula. Plugging them in. Parentheses, parentheses, all over 2 parentheses. Yeah. So where I see b, so negative b, I'm going to put negative 1 inside the parentheses. Where I see a, I'm going to put a 3. And then where I see b, I'm going to put, I'm going to put a negative 16. And now I can take it to Desmos. Now, I know some students who like to just leave the same problem that they were previously working on and then just change out the numbers. So remember that b was negative 1, A was 3, and then C was -16. Okay, so it does give me an answer. It is a decimal answer. That's fine. So I just need to double check that if I am going to be writing this as a simplified answer, this is going to be a 193 in the middle, negative of -1. Let's just double check what that is. Because some people like to fight me on this, right? It's a +1. So this should be +1. And then over 2 times 3. 2 times 3 is 6. So my answer is either 1 minus square root of 193 over 6 or 1 plus square root of 193 over 6. If I am trying to do it without decimals, this would be what my answers look like. Switching out plus or minus for either of my two answers. Or if you wanted to make it the decimal answer, depending on the problem it is, you could just leave this. Okay. So honestly, the biggest thing to me is that you are able to use this formula. Okay? You should be able to use this formula and figure out what to substitute where. So on the next example, please do it on your own and be prepared to walk me through what you did. Sorry. All right, and finally, we have a word problem. It gives me a function, and then here it asks me what's the least amount in dollars that you can charge for a CD to make a profit of $200. So I do want you to try this out on your own, and things I want you to think about. In this equation, which letter, P or X, represents profit? Once you figure that out, what are we going to do with the 200? Where are we putting that in our equation? Before we use our quadratic formula, please remember, what does our equation have to equal? Okay, what is that number, that one side of the equal sign has to be before we use the quadratic formula? How many answers are you going to get in your quadratic formula? If you get more than one answer, based on what it's asking, what is the least amount that you can charge, how are you going to know which one to choose? So please try to work through this on your own. It is part of getting your notes checked off. And be prepared to answer these questions to me and explain it to me, because I am going to ask them to you. All right? Thank you, guys.